In the first part of the show, we heard from Ram and H&M about how their big ambitions for digital product creation as a way to kind of bring together different roles and disciplines, how that all intersected with digital asset management. And we got some really great questions about what the next stage of that build out looks like, not just within the H&M group, but for the industry as a whole. This entire space is still fascinating to me, even after more than a decade of covering it. So I enjoyed having the opportunity to dip in and out in that first half, but I'm going to be playing a more active role now in this second half. In just a minute, I'm going to be bringing Ram back on, and he's going to join a panel discussion where he's going to be flanked by Cara van Malsen, who is a managing director at AVP, our organizers for today, Craig Clanson, who is the Chief Revenue Officer at Browseware, who I have grilled on panels at least once or twice before, I think. Mandy Block, who manages customer success at Orange Logic, and Mark Vickers, who's worked for an imposing roster of big brands in digital product creation and tech leadership roles over the years. While I'm quizzing everyone on the topic of this panel, which is how DAM delivers on the promises of DPC, I'd encourage everyone in the audience to be thinking about their own questions. Still carry on putting them into the Q&A box as we go, and we will address them the same way we just did them, which is we'll pick everyone that we can get to at the end, and we'll go through it with the right speakers and assign them to the right person. It's rare to get a chance to quiz this kind of pool of mixed expertise. So it's really encouraging to see so many questions being asked of Ram, and I'm sure we'll see the same for the wider panel as well. For now, I'm going to welcome all of my speakers on. You folks, you can turn your video on, you can turn your microphone on. Fabulous, good to see you all. So I'm going to start with a little bit about each of you. Now, Ram's excused from this because I think he's already given us a pretty excellent overview of his daily remit as part of his presentation. But I want to get to grips with what the rest of you are focusing on right now and what you're working on. I'm going to go through the order that you just appear in on my little display. And Mark, that puts you first.
Very good. All right, so I'm Mark Vickers. I have been within the greater fashion industry for just over 31 years now, and I am transitioning now into academia. And actually, just from a day-to-day perspective, I'm just now completing a PhD research proposal around the use of digital twins for medical wearables. And so that's where I'm at now.
All right, fabulous. Cara, you're next.
All right. Hi, Cara van Malsen. I am the managing director with AVP. And so we are a consultancy, and that means we get to help brands organize, manage, share, distribute their digital assets. We focus on digital asset management. And so we get to do that to help them create products as well as help them sell products. So we work with both product creation teams as well as marketing teams. So what I've been doing day to day, or what I've been well, let me just say what I've been thinking a lot about lately is how these things can connect. How can the planning, development, design connect with the marketing and selling of products? How can digital assets and the data that are the glue between those things actually streamline the life cycle? And what I'm thinking a lot about right now this week is there's a lot of challenges here because different parts of the business have different words for the same thing. And so what to Ram's point a few minutes ago, taxonomy and enterprise standards. That's what I'm thinking a lot and working on a lot right now. So happy to be here.
Fabulous. Mandy, you're next.
Hi, everyone. Mandy Block. I help lead customer success for the retail vertical at Orange Logic. I have over 10 years experience helping enterprise organizations manage and scale their digital content ecosystems. I've been working with a lot of not just retail global brands, but lifestyle media organizations through complex transformations, initiatives involving not just DAM, but some of their DPC initiatives, large scale integrations, and now AI-driven content operations, which is really exciting. My background combines enterprise content strategy with graduate work focused on supply chain and organizational dynamics, which really shapes how I approach this space as I tend to view content ecosystems not just as technology implementations, but as operational systems that require alignment across workflows, data, governance, and cross-functional with teams. And that's what you need in order to scale efficiently. And what I find most exciting right now is the orchestration challenge, right? As AI accelerates content production and organizations connect more systems across the content lifecycle, the question is no longer how do I store and find assets, right? It's how do we govern, how do we connect, how do we activate them across increasingly complex ecosystems? So that's where the DAM and DPC conversation really starts to converge and where I spend most of my time with clients today. Really looking forward to the conversation.
I think you've just captured most of it in that
There we
introduction.
go.
Craig, no, I'm kidding, but that was really good. We are going to delve into a lot of those topics as we go.
Yeah.
Craig, over to you.
Yep, Craig Planson. I'm the CRO at Browseware. Browseware is really one of the pioneers in the whole DPC space. So I'm sure many of you guys know us from that area. Lots of innovation going on in our world. Where I'm spending most of my time today is really readying our teams for a rapidly changing environment, the innovation change. Everything is shifting. I think AI is changing quite a bit of everything around us. So, how do we help customers drive ROI, maximize value? What's the path forward for them in an AI world? And then, really, how do we activate these digital assets for more use cases that, when the assets are contained too tightly, the value isn't there. So we really look at liberating those assets and driving value overall. That's what we focus on every day.
Okay, and I'm going to stay with you, Craig, because the next question is for everybody. I'm going to do it in reverse order this time. So we're taking part in an event that has two acronyms featured pretty prominently in the title. I've lost count of the number of times that we've said DAM or DPC, but I actually want to start off the questions by dispensing with both of those, at least for a minute. Instead of looking at it through the lens of solutions, I want to ask ourselves what we think we're trying to accomplish when you think about your customer base, in this case, as Browseware. What is the ideal outcome for digital product creation? And the same question for digital asset management as it exists independently and as part of the wider tech estate. Putting a pin in the acronyms and in the tools, what are we trying to do here?
Yeah, I think it's really unifying both. How are they complementary? How are they complementary with other solutions overall? I think we've got a bit of an accessibility challenge in the space. So how do we really make everything more accessible, more unified, more complementary? We don't see a world where this is all broken out in piece parts. That's when things begin to break down. So to me, a lot of it is reducing friction. It's ultimately the ideal outcome, I think, is building an infrastructure versus turning the files into infrastructure overall. How do we make this asset more accessible to machines, to people? Overall, how do we drive better products, faster delivery, less waste? At the end of the day, how does that get used downstream for the multiple use cases? AI, retail, sampling reduction, manufacturing, marketing is just an absolutely urgent use case right now. So it's really how do we bring all that together?
Yep. Okay. Mandy, similar question to you. Like from an outcome and capabilities point of view, when you're thinking about everything you said in your introduction there, what does it look like to build that out successfully?
Yeah. For digital product creation, I would say the ideal outcome is not simply, producing like a digital twin or accelerating design cycles. It's creating that connected operational workflow where product data, creative assets, and that downstream customer experience are aligned from the very beginning. The goal is, of course, to reduce that disconnect between how products are designed internally and how they are ultimately showing up in like e-commerce, marketing, retail, customer engagement. For DAM, the ideal outcome has evolved quite a bit. Historically, it was about storage, governance, retrieval, creating that centralized source of truth for assets, right? But increasingly, I've seen organizations are realizing that storing assets is only a very small part of that challenge. The bigger question is how assets move through that business, how quickly they can be activated across many channels, many systems and teams. That's where those two worlds really start to converge. Yeah.
Okay. Cara, what's your take on this?
Sorry, I'm gonna find the mute button here. So DPC, I guess taking them one by one, digital product creation is the ultimate outcome is the accurate manufacture of an exceptional product that people want to buy and will love. We're trying to create things we can actually put into the market. I think DAM is a enabler of that process. And so the ultimate outcome there, and I'll borrow what Craig said, is a frictionless provisioning of the primarily visual content that is needed at any point in that product lifecycle, whether it's creation or selling, et cetera. And that's by humans, by other systems, and by algorithms or AI. So, the DAM kind of being a central hub in kind of a multifaceted ecosystem.
Good. I like that. That's a good definition. Mark, how about you? What do you see as the outcomes here?
Yeah, so Kara actually stole most of my answer there, but I think the core of it is like really think about that DAM as a very powerful tool, and able to enable us to move forward with things. I think the core of it is like we need to enable people to create highly compelling products that consumers are going to love. And that is what the core of what we're trying to accomplish here. So if you look at from a DAM perspective or the DPC pipelines overall, the end product should be really, really cool stuff.
I like that. That's also a good one. Ram, I think you've probably touched on a bunch of this in your presentation. Do you have anything else you want to add?
I think one thing that Mandy actually she covered, I want to add on to that is I think the interesting world we're entering into now is we are going from under content production to over content production. And that becomes also a huge challenge where before creating a content took time to create. So it means we had to kind of, as you said, searchability, findability, and everything. But now content production is going to happen in like seconds and minutes. So how do you kind of manage when you have this over content production? How do we navigate that space? And also then from an licensing point of view, how do you kind of show that this is a product that you actually produced connected over there? So I feel that is an interesting area that I feel like we need to kind of observe. But from the outcome point of view, for me, it always becomes the same as how do we how do we make sure that we can get the best, at least from my space, like first best physical prototype that we can make a decision on, so that we can make the best product for what the customers love. So that should be the focus from an outcome point of view.
Yeah, I think what you're just mentioning there, the explosion of content, it does add some urgency to this discussion a little bit, because I think it's fair to say we're talking to some extent a little bit about theory, but as theory becomes practice, and I think it's a good kind of operating principle and a reminder to take into the rest of this discussion that the lower the bar is for creating the visual content and the visual assets that Kara mentioned, the more acute the problem of managing those assets becomes. So it's just something to bear in mind as we go. Now, Ram, I'm going to stick with you because building on what we just talked about there and what you covered in your talk, you kind of moved away from using the acronym DPC, as I understand it. And instead, you're framing the work in a similar way to what we've just done there, which is doing whatever it takes in terms of digital tools and processes to get the best possible physical prototype, in your case, like the one thing instead of 4 or 5 sample iterations. Now, what parts of that vision, getting the best prototype, what parts of that fell outside the scope of 3D DPC as we defined it? What was it about wanting to do that made the acronym feel like it wasn't the right fit?
It's purely because DPC became 3D. That's why I'm trying to avoid the acronym over there. But if I had a magic wand right now and people could just say digital product creation, not 3D product creation, then I feel like DPC is the best word out there to represent it. And I think that is where it is like it creates a kind of misguided nature that when I say that a DPC for a DAM, you instantly, for reasons I'm still trying to get my head around, people think it's for 3D assets. And I have to constantly tell people like, yeah, you still have prints, you still have patterns, you still have those items that are nothing related to 3D asset. You still need to manage them. So it is purely from the way we linked the word 3D to a digital product creation, where we're trying to step away from the word DPC. And we're purely talking sometimes even to the point of like product creation and in order to kind of get there. But I wish we can call DPC not from 3D point of view. If that we can get into that world, I accept DPC as a term.
You and I need to have a meeting. We need to workshop what I'm going to call the DPC report at the end of this year. I think there's some work to be done there. Mandy,
I mean, just one thing I can add there is like that's why when I make presentations, usually in my area, I say like digital product creation in the brackets. I say 2D, 3D AI, so that everybody is on the same page and there's no confusion in the dialogues that we're having.
Good. That's not going to fit on the cover. I'll be honest with you. We're going to have to find something snappier for that. Mandy, help ground us in where things are now, because I want to hear from you about where your customers tell you that assets are working against them, whether it's that they don't have them, whether it's the availability of the assets that's the challenge, whether it's the quality or the completeness of them. Like where are assets in a general, as like a big block, slowing things down or working against people's strategic vision now?
Yeah. Yeah, one of the biggest things I hear today from enterprise customers is that assets are no longer slowing organizations down because content is missing. That's no longer the biggest problem. They are slowing organizations down because the systems, the metadata, the workflows around the content are disconnected. What that looks like in practice is real operational friction. Teams spending hours trying to determine which asset version is approved. Product and marketing teams reference different identifiers for what should be the same product. Search results return inconsistent assets across brands or regions. Assets technically exist, but they are not enriched with the metadata needed to move quickly into e-commerce, campaigns, retail, partner channels downstream. So, the closer organizations bring product creation, whatever you want to call it, e-commerce, marketing, DAM workflows together, the more visible those inconsistencies become. Part of the reason is historical, I think. DAM systems traditionally evolved around the needs of marketing and creative teams, campaigns, channels, rights management, brand activation. Meanwhile, product creation teams, organizations built entirely different data models around style numbers, SKUs, colorways, materials, production life cycles. Independently, these systems made sense, but now organizations are trying to connect them into a single content supply chain where the same asset may originate in product creation, move through rendering, approval workflows, and then flow into a traditional DAM to eventually power the e-commerce, retail marketplaces, and campaigns globally. What my clients are discovering is that the hard part is no longer connecting the systems. It is aligning the meaning of the data flowing between them, right? So a colorway may mean one thing to design and something completely different to merchandising. One brand may structure product hierarchies differently than another. A style number in PLM does not always align to the asset structure in DAM.
Yep.
And multiply that problem, obstacle, by many brands, many regions, many agencies, many downstream platforms, and the result is delayed campaigns, broken search experiences, duplicate work, compliance risk, and ultimately a loss of trust in the platform itself. So that loss of trust is critical because once users stop believing the metadata is reliable, they stop relying on the platform operationally. Teams start building spreadsheets. They start going back to local storage and manual workarounds, which defeats the purpose of building a huge connected content supply chain ecosystem in the first place. So kind of wrapping it up, the organizations navigating successfully today are the ones treating data strategy and governance as foundational to the transformation, not as a cleanup work after implementation, because at the end of the day, the asset itself is rarely the problem. The real challenge is whether the organization can trust the data and workflows surrounding that asset enough to move the speed of the business that it requires.
Great. And I think one of the key things that sticks with me from what you just said is the difference in meaning and context of the same information across multiple different use cases. And I think we're at a pretty pivotal moment in terms of tech evolution when it comes to allowing people to interact with that stuff and to generate meaning from it and extract meaning from it. But that's something we're going to get into as we go. Craig, I have a question for you. So I talked a little bit before about what we originally saw as like the holy grail for digital product creation when I look back to our 2015 work. And that was the point where anyone could make any creative or commercial decision based on a digital representation of a product, right? We've also said pretty in print on record that I don't think we got there. I don't think that vision has been achieved. Now, I know Browseware's North Star is what you refer to as like 95% right first time. So I want to just look through that lens and kind of test or maybe revalidate or even dismiss that operating definition of DPC success and understand how far we are from it. Do you think that Holy Grail is still a viable goal? Is it still a good idea for a 3D asset to stand in for everything a physical sample would do? Or have people become really fixated on this idea of having a complete digital twin that can do everything, and that maybe that's become outdated, it's outlived its usefulness? What's your take on that?
Yeah, a lot going on there. So I think some of it I would say is kind of a reframing of the problem we're solving. A lot of when I first came to Browseware was very focused on eliminating the physical sample, as you said, right? So, the way we look at it is, like you said, 95% first time right prototypes. Like we're not out to eliminate the sample, but that was the intended goal. And that's the bar it was measured on at some point here. But really, some samples can be eliminated on the repeats with just change in color, things of that nature. Absolutely. but often they do need to be touched. There's an emotional component to it, a trust component, and we have to continue to build that trust. So I don't think the goal was the wrong goal. I think it became too narrow in focus. I do think it's absolutely multiple use cases. It's different depending on the perspective you come from by persona and role. So it's different for, different roles, as many others have said here. I think it's a bit of, ultimately the wrong question at the end of the day. Like to me, the right question is what decisions can made digitally that are currently be made physically. So not replacing everything, but things like fit approvals, colorway sign-offs, buyer presentations, virtual photography, AI should be increasingly digital. So to me, it's really a phased approach. It's use case dependent. It's not absolute in black and white.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. That's good. That's a good answer. Mark, the kind of a related question a little bit. So I don't want us to just run the DPC acronym into the ground and criticize it nonstop today, but I want to be a bit fairer to it and point out that the second two letters of it, product creation, have always kind of been the scope. It should always been focused on bringing cool stuff to market, to paraphrase what we said there. That covers conception, design, development of products. It doesn't necessarily touch manufacturing, doesn't necessarily touch selling by that fixed definition. I think over the last few years in particular, people have tried to stretch that definition to encompass manufacturing. They tried to stretch it to encompass selling. And I think a lot of that's been done under the banner of what's been called like scaling digital product creation. I've been on stages before where people have said, we need to scale our digital product creation strategies, by which they meant we need to take those assets and make more extensive use of them downstream or upstream. I think it's had some mixed success. I mean, in some cases, you do have files that were created in design and are used in virtual photography. Some cases you're driving hardware on the shop floor, not necessarily all of them. What opportunities do you see in front of us now to go after that more end-to-end approach, maybe without having to stretch or contort the definition of DPC?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like over the last probably few months, I've had very interesting conversations with a number of like key kind of enlightened players across industries. One thing that we're looking at is that it's no longer digital product creation, it's really a digital pipeline. So if you think about extending on the point that you just had there, of like if I create assets in the design processes, how can I use those in other areas as well? I think one of the things, if we get back to the core of what the conversation here is around DAM, is that like if you look at the separate domains of product creation or digital or direct to consumer or manufacturing or supply chain. So how do I think about those things in a more unified way? I would say if there's somebody here who is like on the call who is thinking about developing a DAM strategy going forward, they should be thinking about it from an enterprise perspective. We shouldn't be looking at DAM as I have a marketing DAM, I have a product creation DAM, I have a content distribution network piece of it. They need to be looking at that as a holistic solution, as that we look at tearing apart some of the complex integrations that we've had in the past around the sharing of assets and being able to reuse those or further enrich them as they move down through that pipeline.
Okay, cool. Cara, I'm going to pull out something Mark's just mentioned, and I think that Craig hinted at as well. It's pretty clear that we're not talking, when we talk about assets, when we talk about the end-to-end uses for them, it's pretty clear we're not talking about just 3D meshes. We're not talking about even just the materials they use to texture them. If you just think about the umbrella of DPC, an asset can be 2D, it can be 3D, it can be a rough sketch, it can be a final, like meticulously staged photograph, it can be trims, it can be components. There's a lot of different content, a lot of different media, in other words, that gets created as part of the product journey. And I want to get your take, because I think you've got a good perspective on this, on just how heterogeneous the definition of an asset is, and what you think it means to design tools and workflows that wrap around that, what feels like a massive scope of potential stuff.
Right. Yeah, I think going back to what Craig said a minute ago, it depends on the use case. So I think we could think of classes of assets maybe, where there's the ones that are maybe more designer oriented. So kind of who's the persona, what's the use case? So there's maybe the reusable, the styleless, seasonless prints and patterns, material scans, color information, and maybe even things like fit blocks, blanks, avatars, lasts, et cetera, that they can be reused over and over again. It's primarily for the designer, and that's the persona that's targeted, but like that's a class of kind of a library of design tools that have they have lasting power over time. So then there's the classes of assets that are things that go across hands, across personas. So maybe more style specific assets. So the CAD sketches, that those are needed in the design process. They're used by merchandising as well. So those are passing hands. And those might be, if you have a style that carries over across seasons, those things are going to have, life beyond just one use in one season. So they have carryover potential and reusability there, but also reusability across personas, which is where we start getting more into that point we've been making about how the data has to enable that flow, where it's not just designers now speaking designer speak, it's designers needing to hand off to merchandising and their tools, and to product, development and product lifecycle and speaking their language and their tools. So speaking the common language, or having a common language across those. And then there's kind of, as we talked about before, a few people have hinted, is the class of assets that potentially can span from the earliest stages of design all the way down to distribution, sell-in, et cetera. And so how do we enable that full ecosystem and digital pipeline, as Mark said, across that life cycle, whether that's specific to a style, a season, a line plan, or across seasons, across lines, et cetera. So, I think we get caught up in it's all assets, but they have different uses. They have different people who need them at different times in different places and in different environments. So if we think about digital asset management, it is a capability that allows us to centralize those things and enable the access for those who need them when they need them, whether those are people, machines, or what have you. So it's, and then the classification of those assets that couples with permissions, access, et cetera, to enable the right provisioning of use at the right time by the right people. So of approved content. So, yeah.
And what do you think brings the structure there? Does the technology, does the software bring the structure? Does the organization and the process bring the structure? If you think about the classification, think about the use cases, think about the user base, where do we start to actually put some logic behind them?
That's the logic that every enterprise has to build for itself, because every single organization is totally different. So the dam is like a black box, or not black box, not the right word, blank slate. How about that? And it can be adapted to fit your organization, your use cases, your users, et cetera. This is where the work is. And this is a challenge to think about how do we classify, segment, and create the workflows around those things. And so, that's the hard part, as Mandy was saying. Like, it's not the technology. The technology is going to enable those things. Once those decisions are made, they can be then implemented and enabled. But no, it's not a technological problem. It's a governance problem. It's a data problem. That's where the work is.
Good. I think you've kind of stolen the march on the question I was going to ask Ram, actually, which is my own fault. But Ram, we've already talked about separating the objective from the acronym, right? We've already said what we're trying to accomplish with product creation versus DPC. I think it's fair to say that a lot of companies do put the technology first in the framing. A lot of innovation initiatives start as software projects with discrete labels and individual aims. And that means that those projects then become defined and delimited by that software. Companies buy 3D, They buy PLM, they buy ERP, and so on, because those are the pre-scoped tools, pre-packaged, pre-sold, pre-marketed, that promise to solve the problem. I was going to say make the case, but make a slightly more acute version of the case that Kara's just made for why that's the wrong mindset, and what you think it looks like practically to start with a set of capabilities instead of a short list of solutions.
I mean, again, I think there are three aspects for me if I look into it. One is usually like within our space. Also, we talk about are we talking about problem statement point of view or an opportunity statement point of view? So sometimes you can think from a solution point of view because you have not identified a opportunity that is out there. So let's take AI or a dam for AI, whatever it comes into that space. Then we can think like, okay, something is happening in the space from technological point of view. Is there an opportunity that we have to assess it that could solve a specific business problem? So it is okay to start from a solution point of view, but then keeping in mind that we should just not take a solution and feed it into the process that we have and looking at like which parts of it make sense, which parts of it doesn't make sense and go into it. And then you have the process point of view in terms of like, okay, I do have a problem within the company I need to solve. Then you have to think objectively in terms of like, what is the process that we need to establish for it to make it happen? But then there is a third layer that often undermines, and I think Mark kind of touched upon that really goes in my heart is the damn strategy. Then you also need to think about it like, okay, is it from a financial sector that you want to solve and you want to optimize the whole end-to-end pipeline? Then you need to think from a DAM, from an end-to-end perspective, what we want to solve rather than thinking from a design point of view or marketing point of view and everything. So that is where it actually boils down to is like, what is your core reason, what you want to solve here? Is it because you found an interesting solution out there that you think it calls solve a business problem? Then okay, cool. What was that? Or is it something that you find is a business problem that we want to solve? Or is it something that you understood that the present business problem is you have too many dams and too many design tools and everything, we want to merge them together to optimize an end-to-end pipeline. So as long as you understand the core reason why you want to do and with a purpose behind like it will solve a business problem, business process that you want to ambition towards. And if you have a clarity in terms of what is the present state you are in and what is the future state you want to go to and what kind of expected outcomes, so quantifiable and qualitative outcomes that you're kind of targeting towards, then it is fine to start from a solution point of view as long as you are able to reach that decision point where you have that perspective on what you want to do. But if you reach the decision point because it's a cool technology, then it just falls apart there and then for me.
Okay, cool. Good perspective. Craig, when we think about the stuff that Kara's just said, the sheer kind of diversity in different classes and different use cases for assets, what constitutes an asset, and we recognize that assets are made up of different living interrelated pieces, it feels like we're making a renewed case for integration and standardization. We want all of those things to live in one place and work together. Those pieces are inherently less useful if they live in a bunch of different places and they don't connect with one another, and we can't centralize them, we can't interact with them. Now, I know Browseware has been an advocate for interoperability and standardization in the past. You've taken an agnostic route to partnerships and connectors. Tell me how that philosophy feels right now. How does that extend into this different framing for the creation and the management of assets?
Yeah. Well, I think this is probably for us the most exciting part of what's going on right now. That, the drive for this multi-use nature, the multiple systems that are involved, it has just driven the need for this interoperability in the open approach. So Browser has always been able to go very deep, but has had a complicated approach. With our open platform layer for headless and for vStitcher and for our cloud-based version of StyleZone, we can access about anything right now. We're doing a lot with Claude and other systems to be able to really democratize that code that needs to be written to activate those layers, not only to take advantage of what we do, but how does that interoperate with everyone else? So no single platform should own the full asset stack. And I say that as a vendor, right? Like we've always believed in that open approach. I think a lot of what has been talked about here today is there is no one player that solves this whole piece. You have multiple use cases. We've said that many times. There's no one best of breed solution that's going to do the whole thing. So we really look at standardization matters at creation time, not as retrofit. Assets created without a downstream schema can't be activated. That's a data architecture decision, not a technology limitation, and it's gotten easier than it's ever been. So we're super excited about this part of the open approach.
Okay, cool. Mark, when we frame an asset the way we've just been doing, we're describing a pretty, and certainly the integration and the extensibility side of stuff that Craig's just talked about. We're talking about something that has a lot of utility for a lot of different people. Most kind of transformation initiatives don't get scoped on the it's potentially valuable to everybody kind of basis. They get scoped on the it's going to deliver a tangible return in a discrete, measurable area for a specific team. What do you think needs to change in the way organizations are set up, and maybe how transformation projects are architected, if we're going to extend some of this vision for using DEM to deliver on the promise of DPC to that much, much wider audience?
Yeah, it's not really like there's been a lot of conversation here, and this is going to sound strange coming from the technologist, which is part of this panel, but it's not about the technology. It's really around end-to-end process thinking, and also the organizational design, which goes to support that. So if you think about like the establishment of enterprise standards, so that if I create assets in the design processes, how can I reuse those as part of the selling experiences or enrich them to use those again there as well? I think the core of it is that we need to look at the end-to-end business process mapping or engineering that to think holistically. Right now, they're very suboptimal in that I'm like working on product creation, or I'm in the marketing area, or I'm selling or manufacturing. We need to think about it in a much bigger way, and then also do the organizational design that supports that end-to-end thinking. It is myopic thinking that we have going on in many of the corporations right now.
Okay. Mandy, kind of related question to you, which is if you think about what Mark's just said, and I want to know what you're seeing in terms of how actual users, end users, companies of DAM are integrating digital assets into big sort of sweeping strategic visions. There's a cultural change stuff we just talked about. And that all means kind of stacking up from discrete pieces of transformation to a complete customer experience. When you and I chatted before the event, you told me that Orange Logic, and you mentioned this in your intro, is as much of a kind of complete content platform and a content ecosystem as it is a DAM company. Tell me what that means in practice, and tell me how you think the wider industry, confining ourselves to fashion, but you can bring in examples from outside, is adjusting its priorities to reflect that.
Yeah. Yeah, that shift from DAM to like content orchestration platform is something I'm seeing in real time with many enterprise organizations. And it's much bigger than just a product evolution at this point. It's a fundamental shift, right? And how companies think about content infrastructure, not just where the asset lives, but how content and data and workflows move end to end across enterprise. I know we're hearing that a lot in our answers, that end-to-end content supply chain. When I first got into DAM space, God, 10 years ago now, most DAM conversations were about storage and search and governance, version control. And those are still really important, but they're table stakes now. The bigger question clients are asking today is how content moves through the business. How quickly can we activate it across downstream experience? Organizations getting the most value are the ones that stop treating DAM as a repository and start treating it as a connective layer across the content supply chain. They're connecting PLM systems that we're talking about today, 3D design platforms, right? There's many of those. I know Craig has mentioned, the interoperability is super important between these tools. And, we need to have a centralized content ecosystem. And that organizational strategy that Mark had emphasized is super important. What's especially interesting is that many of these environments, the DAM is no longer the destination where users go to download files. Increasingly, we're seeing it's becoming the infrastructure, a more headless orchestration layer managing metadata. I think that was one of the questions earlier in the webinar, right? Headless versus, a seat in the DAM. We're seeing more of that headless orchestration layer managing metadata, workflows, those identifiers, permissions, and distribution across a much larger operational ecosystem. And that changes the conversation entirely. We have clients using Orange Logic to manage the earliest digital representations of a product before it physically exists. And that same platform is later delivering those assets into e-commerce campaigns, marketplaces, retail partners, and even AI-driven downstream experiences is the newest version of that. So what organizations are realizing is that the hard part is no longer simply connecting those systems. The real challenge is aligning the meaning of the data flowing between them. Questions around taxonomy, metadata governance, product hierarchies, source of truth ownership suddenly becomes business critical because content is now moving across dozens of interconnected systems and teams. And the companies that are ahead of the game, that are treating this as a content supply chain, with the same rigor that they apply to like the physical supply chains. Those are the ones that behind are still treating their data on like a hard drive with a search bar. So those that are behind are still using it as a repository. Those that are ahead are really using it more as a content supply chain. So I honestly, I think that's the biggest industry shift.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think it also reflects what we see in terms of the way that fashion brands in particular operate. Like the external factors are dictating some of that, technology evolutions dictating some of that, just responding to market pressures and competitors and things is driving a lot of that. Like it seems like that is a very kind of business model driven transformation that manifests itself in the way people approach technology rather than being like a tech first transformation. Cara, my last like individual question is to you before I get into one for the whole panel and then audience questions. And it is, I'm going to harken back to a podcast interview I did with you a while ago. And in that, one of the key things you said was that you see DAM as a practice or a discipline, not as a tool. Now, it's easier to predict the trajectory of a tool because I can look at somebody's roadmap and I can say, okay, I can either see or I can infer 1 to 3 years from now what this piece of software is going to look like. And that those kind of roadmaps are either public or occasionally we get privileged access as members of the press, which I have to keep under NDA. But I want you to try and give me a roadmap instead for the practice of DAM, the discipline of DAM, where it goes from here over the next couple of years, and specifically how you think it interacts with and enhances digital product creation as a discipline and a practice.
Well, I think as a discipline and a practice, when we're thinking about digital product creation, I think what's on the roadmap is awareness building. And that's actually what we're doing here today, because historically and traditionally, DAM has been thought of as a practice in a tool set for marketing and not for the product creation side of the house, which obviously, as we've seen and heard, create a lot of assets that are, things that various people need to use and reuse. So I think there's just specifically for what we're talking about today, digital product creation, it's that awareness. And it's on the platform side, on the vendor side. So we have, some vendors who are keenly aware of that. We have Orange Logic here and they understand that space. But you talk about this topic to some of the other DAM vendors out there, and they really are not familiar. It's just not what's been requested of them to date. And so that is also pointing to an awareness from the buyer perspective within organizations. They're not thinking of, hey, we have all these digital assets in our product creation pipeline. We might have a digital asset management problem. They're thinking of it with other terms, other vocabularies. So we have a file problem. We have I don't know what words they use. That's the tricky part. For how do you target them and market to them and say, it's actually a DAM problem that you have. And you know what? There are solutions for this. So that is, I think, one thing on the roadmap within this space, as we're talking about, is just that the awareness that there are capabilities, there are experts, there are tools, there are best practices that can help solve this end-to-end pipeline, digital asset pipeline problem. And connect data and systems together to enable the reuse. So I don't know, that's one that definitely comes to mind, is that we're in a pretty early stage. So it's cool that we're in a place technologically where there's so much capability and opportunity. And I'm hopeful that from the technical roadmap perspective, we're going to see this connectivity get easier with maybe MCP, maturity, because boy, connecting these tools together is still kind of a pain in the butt. I'm not gonna lie. It's hard to do. It's hard to maintain, always breaking and all this stuff. So I hope we're gonna be able to get to that more interconnected vision as an industry where we can enable that more frictionless experience without a team of developers sitting there constantly trying to fix the little things that are breaking. So those are just a couple of things that pop into mind.
They're good. They're good. They're good ones. I'm going to throw a spanner in the works, as they say, or wrench, depending on which side of the pond we're on. Which is I'm going to bring AI into the picture to bring us to a close, which is going to complicate a bunch of these things, or potentially solve it. You know, you mentioned MCP. Let's see how we go here. I've tried to keep AI separate from the discussion so far. I haven't put any questions about it because I'm not against the idea. You're going to see plenty in our upcoming AI report, both sides of the kind of growing tension around AI. But I wanted to give everybody a chance to present their take on it at once rather than parceling it out. And the way I want to tee up the AI conversation is this way. So we've already talked about how the definition of DAM has evolved to reflect the changing nature of what constitutes an asset, to reflect external kind of environment changes, business model changes, and so on. We haven't touched on who the recipients of those assets are outside of the scope of saying, well, it's more job roles, it's more people, it's potentially headless stuff. It's increasingly potentially agents, not people. And when I talked to Cara on the podcast last year, I know this came up, the idea of DEM being machine readable, being oriented more around that than being person oriented. I know Ram has some thoughts about vectorization and retrieval as they cross over into digital asset management. I want to give each of you a minute. Just tell me how you think AI is affecting DEM, DPC, or both. I'm going to do it based on the order you're now in my little camera preview, which is shuffled around from last time. Mandy, it puts you first.
Oh, exciting. Yeah. I mean, I think AI is fundamentally changing the role, both DAM and DPC, because assets are no longer being managed by and for people, right? They're increasingly being consumed by systems, models, agents. So historically, DAM was optimized for human retrieval, folders, metadata, taxonomy search. But AI shifts the focus towards context, relationships, machine readable data, things like semantic retrieval, automated enrichment, metadata enrichment, dynamic content activation become much more important. And what's especially interesting is that AI raises the importance of governance rather than reducing it. Metadata is more important than ever. Taxonomy, product data are, if they're inconsistent across systems, AI simply scales that inconsistently faster. So that's why I think DAM and DPC are converging so quickly right now. Organizations are building connected ecosystems where product data, as we mentioned, 3D assets, renders, marketing content all flow together operationally. So AI accelerates that value of the ecosystem, and only if that underlying data and workflows are trustworthy.
Cool. Good answer. And you were in the minute as well. Well done. Cara, same question to you. You're next.
Oof, I agree with a lot of what Mandy said. I think ambitions around AI are putting a lot of pressure on both DAM and DPC, and then they kind of feed into each other because if on the DPC side AI is being used to generate models, prototypes, renditions, or variants from maybe it's a 2D representation, and you're going to use AI to create 3D. And that's only going to work when the AI has the data to use and leverage and learn from. So it points to the need for some kind of centralization of those assets, and maintaining those libraries. So but on the DAN side, the pressure flips. It's like, well, the DPC generating all these AI renders. What do we do with it? Do we keep them all? Is this all stuff we keep forever? And how do we track the provenance of those things and the lineage of them? Do we tell people, our users, like, hey, this was an AI generated image, so that they understand that? And there are regulations coming into effect that require you to disclose that information in machine readable form if you're distributing externally. But even for internal users, that disclosure is going to be important. So it's just another little slice of the complications that are coming up in that space.
Okay. Mark, same question to you.
Yeah. So, well, Mandy and Kara both like nailed that one. I think this shows as AI becomes more and more powerful, more and more crucial to enterprises, that the standardization and the use of a core DAM becomes that much more important. And that having a structured layer of data allows you to empower those AI tools in a much greater way. I would say one thing that we need to look at as well is that AI is an extremely powerful tool, and like going back to my innovation background, we are now able to solve some problems that we were not ever able to solve before. And I think that we're going to start to be able to see some of that stuff of like, what are some of the core things that we're trying to resolve? And now AI can help us to empower and get those things resolved. So,
Cool. Craig, question to you as well. So you mentioned Claude specifically. You mentioned integrating browseware into AI first workflows here. Tell me a bit about what you think that looks like, and tell me how that affects Dan.
Yeah, I think AI is going to help realize the vision for DPC much faster than it would have on its own. So we're hugely behind this. I think brands doing DAM properly are sitting on an AI-ready library today. Everyone else has got a rebuild problem that you've got to be able to get to this data. I go back to accessibility. AI imagery is arriving fast and it's good, but it's only as accurate and structured as the data behind it. And I think even more reason for, accessibility and not a walled garden in today's environment. I think we're into open it up and the genie's out of the bottle. So
Yeah.
it's exciting times.
Cool. I'll take that. Ram, final one is to you.
And also, I think I usually like to differentiate the AI sector into maybe three categories. Then you have like the generative AI that we often talk about. Then we often, or I think we touched upon also like searchability AI, which is like, where you want to RAG search and all of it. But I think which excites me the most is agentic workflows. I think that is also where we start combining the DAM and DPC and all of them together, where you can say like, okay, I want you to create a product, I want you to search something in the library, and then I want you to make this colorway from this thing, and then make a different product. So now you don't have this kind of DAM as a separate entity and a design as a separate entity. You kind of like connecting all this kind of tools and technology into a pipeline, kind of what you do. And I think that actually is where excites me the most, because you can kind of curate this kind of workflows and methodologies where you are running maybe AI workflows underneath it, or classical tools like what we talk about MCPs and all of it, where we don't need AI, maybe deterministic and non-deterministic workflows that we can achieve. But I think one of the critical aspect that starts to fascinate is previously when you talk about from a design generated, you can actually easily say that, okay, this design had a specific time, traceability in terms of where it came from or where it couldn't come from. Maybe you had an idea in your head. But with AI, what's going to happen is we're going to have something like traceability, where you can figure out that this was generated with nano banana models or these models and stuff. So with traceability tracking back, where legally and IP rights perspective, we also need to think about how to handle that world. So often that people feel like, okay, I can just generate with AI, but before you could say like, I was inspired, but you can kind of say that, were you inspired by yourself, or were you inspired by looking at a competitive brand? Were you inspired by something else? You could never really prove it. But now you actually can prove it by saying you were inspired by writing this prompt inside an AI model that kind of generated this. So it creates a very interesting challenge in terms of that area also. So I feel like agentic workflows with generative models, how do we handle legal IP and everything? I think that is where it excites, especially me the most, and like, oh, this is going to be a fun challenge to solve.
Yeah, no, I see that. I think that's a fascinating one. Okay, we've got time for a couple of audience questions as well. Before I bring us to a close, Joy asks an interesting one, which is, besides downloads, quote unquote, what are good reports to show the value of assets? And I'm going to enrich this one a bit with my point of view, which is downloads would be your traditional fixed form marketing and content oriented consumption metric for this kind of thing. It would be to say, we have final assets here, we have final pixels here, however they were created, and we've put them in front of people and they have been used X amount of time across these channels and these platforms, and that is the value of them, is how that's been served. How do we add metrics that reflect the broader scope of the broader sort of asset classes that we're talking about, and also the much, much wider utility and value of this? Who wants to take a crack at that one?
I would add, besides downloads, some of the stronger reporting frameworks show that operational efficiency, asset reuse, workflow acceleration, downstream activation, ecosystem connectivity. So not just those, single asset reporting, but how does it impact the larger ecosystem, right?
Okay, cool. Anyone else? Any ideas for how we measure this?
I
yeah.
Quick
Nope.
step in. Oh, Mark,
Go ahead,
go
Craig.
ahead, Mark.
No, go ahead, Craig. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I always think of outcome orientation, right? So reduce costs, increase revenue, faster time to market. I mean, there's certainly real proven, reductions in samples that we can show in certain cases that need to be measured and often aren't. Same thing around some of the photo shoot costs where there's just overtaxing of that. Like the use cases are there. I don't think people have necessarily measured them. So I always kind of go to how do we measure impact and get that front and center so that everyone can,
Yeah.
align to the outcomes that why you did the whole project in the first place.
And I think from Mark, back to you in a sec, but I think from when we think about AI, particularly at the minute, there is a whole conversation around like outcome-based pricing and things like that when it comes to the technology layer of this. And I think that could be something that we're potentially looking at, like outcome-based metrics and measurement here. Mark, what were you going to say?
I was going to go into the adoption piece of it as well. So it's not just on financial metrics or like speed, but are people actually using the system and are they getting the power out of it that they're looking for?
Mhm.
And so it is, right today we have a lot of people who are working outside of systems. We have that both on the PLM side for even the design space. And so if we are looking at are people getting the power out of the damn tool that they need? We should be measuring some of the adoption metrics there as well.
Yeah, and that's right. And Michelle has just not a question, but a little follow-on thing from this, which is they would love to know where their assets are going, who's accessing them, and how do they perform. And as a follow-up, saying it'd be great to have the life cycles managed across all platforms, internally and externally, automatically. If external partners are using our assets, what are they doing with them? Do they own them? And I think that's, again, this is not just a transformation when we think about DPC, digital asset management, how those things travel together. It's not just an in-house small audience, single department sort of transformation. Neither is it just a single brand, single stakeholder transformation. It's something that has to extend to supply chain partners and everything else when you bring this picture together. I'm cognizant of time, so I'm going to tackle our last question, and I will throw this out there for a minute. So Douglas saying that product design files that are final, quote unquote, from the product designer's point of view, often are not final. They get tweaked in the factory as they get productized, or as people find the most efficient way to actually build it. So what feels final at one point is not necessarily so. I cannot tell you the number of like Word document revisions that get sent to me that are like V2 final so and so edit and so on. Like this, that's the common damn problem. But if we think about the sort of fashion teams we're talking about here, it seems like there's that argument for looping in manufacturing into this. It's critical to getting you to final, but that's also difficult to do. I think everybody who's been in this space will know that it's not, the incentives don't always align, the workflows and the standards and things don't always align to get everybody on board. Douglas calls that an interesting loop to try to close, and I think that's an understatement. Anyone have any thoughts on what it might mean to close that?
If I can quickly add into that, I think it boils down to, again. Let me take a couple of examples, right? So let's say usually one usually is like a pattern. Like you make a pattern and you send it to your factories. They usually tweak it from both from manufacturing point of view, but also from consumption point of view, calculations point of view. But the boils down factor is like, are you as a brand, do you believe that final tweaks and adjustments is so valuable in order to kind of generate the outcome coming out of it? And that is where it comes down to effort to value ratio, right? So yes, you can do it, but is the effort worth the gain that you're getting it by those tweaks and adjustments of a final product that you want for the next season? Maybe as a brand that you want to have the tweaks and adjustments to in order to make sure the next season you have a better understanding of consumption calculations, cost calculations, exact on point when you want to do running series or repeat series or something. That makes sense into it. Same goes for a print or a product over there. I think it boils down to is like, what is your brand strategy in terms of the effort for you to have that kind of final tweaks and adjustments? And you're doing it because you want to use it for the next season for that level of accuracy that you are aiming towards. And that's where it boils down to for me. I think just solving the problem for the sake of solving the problem, I don't see is a way of going forward, because often we realize that how do we give licenses for all of them? How do you cross collaboration with all of them? How do you manage that final tweak that they did? They did it and they kept it in their own thing? And then we have to build integrations for it. So there's a lot of cost association. We need to think about people and non-people costs behind it to justify the need of the resources that need to be put behind it. If you see there is a value, sure, there are ways of solving it, but often I see that the effort doesn't outline to the value it generates.
Okay, interesting. Something to take away and think about. Now, we are out of time. So that's a wrap, folks. I want to thank everybody for joining us. I especially want to thank all of our speakers. I want to thank our organizers at AVP, Brittany, Chris. There's a lot of work's gone into getting this together. It's been fun to chair it, but all the hard work really goes on behind the scenes. I just get to sit in front of a camera and a microphone and make it seem like I've done all the work. There's a lot I'm personally going to be taking away from this, not least because, as I said, there's some big questions at the interline we should be asking ourselves about what this year's DPC report looks like, how we articulate the importance of digital assets to that vision. That report's not coming for quite a while. We release it at the end of the year. So I would encourage you to make sure if you want something to read, consider play with right away, go and explore the article that the AVP team have written. The link for it was up during the break. I think it'll be put up at the end of the session here as well. And play around with the calculator that the folks there have put together, because it helps to make some of this stuff a bit more concrete. I know we talked a lot about theory, but it's important to just take away for yourselves that we're dealing with deeply embedded, very practical, mission-critical systems and people and workflows here. And the end of the road for these kind of conversations is it's a tech estate that treats digital assets and the processes and the people and the workflows around them as strategic resources for much more than just marketing and comms. And I think that's the essence of the future of digital product creation to some extent. So for me, thank you very much for being here. Thanks to all the speakers, thanks to the organizers, and thanks for attending.